Well, it has been a busy day for gaming news. So much so that there are a few things I wanted to point out here going into tomorrow when I'm going to do a full breakdown of Nintendo's how they did with their recent fiscal quarter, which spoiler, it was very good and Nintendo does seem to be on track to not only hit the 19 million, but I think they might have an opportunity to go for 20 million potentially in this current fiscal year. Certainly 20 million in the first calendar year for the Switch 2. But there are a couple of things here with Nintendo that they're cutting it close a bit. And one is pretty obvious, but I wanted to go back to even last generation with the Switch 1, and the other has to do with concerns that Nintendo could end up having to raise prices for the Switch 2 because well, guess what? They were even asked about that, but we'll take a look at all that and more, guys. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. So, again, I know the focus, especially today with a lot of the discussion around the Switch 2 sales and how it's clipped 17 million units already in the first three quarters for this fiscal year, which if you look at where the Switch 2 is in its life, that's 7 months in. That's quite a few units to be able to ship out. They also told us about sell-in numbers and sell through. So that again, that's all stuff I'll touch on tomorrow morning in Newswave, 8 a.m. Eastern. So check it out there. But no, right now I wanted to focus a bit on the Switch 1 because I do think it's something that's very impressive. That's of course being overshadowed right now by the new system that Nintendo's put out with the Switch 2. But the Switch 1 is an incredibly impressive system for what it was able to accomplish from 2017 onward. And not only from a hardware side for Nintendo, but a software side. So with the recent report, the Switch 1 is now the best selling system ever for Nintendo in history. It did eclipse, yes, the Nintendo DS, but also along with the hardware, look at the software, the disparity in the software numbers. 1.5 billion, yeah, billion units for the Switch, 948 million for the DS. It's not quite double that, but I mean, it's a significant increase in terms of software. This is the first system Nintendo's also produced that has turned out more than a billion units of software sold in that generation, and it eclipsed it by quite a margin. I mean, it's 50% up from that high watermark of 1 billion. Even, yeah, is it even the DS or the Wii? Neither of them were able to do it, but you think about the fact that they did run alongside of each other. Nintendo had a handheld and a console division at that time. That if you combine those, yeah, that's still ahead of what the Switch 1 has done. But for just a single console hybrid system that wasn't split up into a console and a handheld, that is it's quite impressive and definitely worth noting here. But the attention has turned to what's next? What's after the DS? Well, it's the PS2. And it's a whole meme online now about Sony just finding PlayStation 2 systems. I guess, oh, you know what? I know it was like right around that 156 million. Now it's 160 million. Does it have anything to do with the Switch rapidly approaching the PS2? Well, I maybe, but it was just Jim Ryan kind of said it in an offhanded comment during, I think it was just a, I don't know, podcast or something he was on. And then Sony did go in and update the numbers. It's just 160 million. Now, to be fair, I know people are going back and forth on it. There was some calculations that were being done even a couple of years before Jim Ryan made those comments, where people are trying to figure out how many systems the PS2 actually sold when it was all said and done. And that was a roundabout number that people were coming to, near 160 million. So again, I know it's kind of a joking thing right now. It's like Sony did this because they had to keep that top crown, but that does seem to be the legitimate number of PS2 systems, and they say 160 million or more. So who knows? Maybe the Switch gets to 158 or 159 million, and Sony's like, you know what? It's actually 163 million. Now the Switch, it's cutting it close because it's not selling rapidly. Probably not shocking to people right now. Again, the focus is on the Switch 2, and I think the Switch 1 would be able to sell at a faster rate if it was cheaper. It's just the Switch Lite doesn't appeal to people as much as the Switch, Redbox Switch OLED, because it doesn't switch, just bottom line. Yes, it's cheaper, but I don't know if that price offset is enough to take away the core feature of the Switch going from TV to handheld mode and then back to TV, just that hybrid nature. So I think what Nintendo would have to do is more or less get rid of the Switch OLED, the Switch, and then the Switch Lite and come to the market with one singular SKU that is cheaper than, I mean, probably if they came out with like a $250 Switch system that replaced the entire lineup and that's what they were going to roll with, I mean, that would, I think, propel it easily beyond the PS2, and it would kind of be in the same mindset of the 2DS XL, where that was a pretty good price when it released, and it was kind of this random, what is Nintendo doing here? Like, it's very odd to announce that when we're all talking about the Switch. So Nintendo, if they really want to do that, that would probably be the strategy. I don't know how much they care right now, to be honest, because the Switch One, they are projecting 4 million total in this fiscal year, so they're thinking they're not even going to sell another, I don't know, 700 or so thousand in the current fiscal quarter now that'll end March 31st. And then who knows what they're going to plan out for next year with the Switch One. So it's very possible it comes up short of the 160 million. But we'll have to see if they have any other tricks up their sleeve. Like I said, some kind of Switch One revision that does fill out a portion of the market that I think really needs it. That's just the lower end, like in terms of pricing, the lower end market. At this time, $300 or less is, you look around at how expensive all these different systems are, that's viewed as downright cheap. So that's we'll see if Nintendo wants to attack that price point. Still though, impressive stuff, I think, all the way around for the Switch One. I don't think anyone believed, wow, this could end up being the best selling system of all time. I'm thinking back to the 2017, 2018 days, right? But hey, it managed to at least do that for Nintendo at this time. Okay, so the other thing they're cutting it close right now, and it seems to have analysts and investors a bit uneasy, at least to the point where they are continuing to ask Nintendo if they are going to be raising prices on the Switch 2. So what happened is we did get their entire report that they released, and there's been a lot of focus naturally around the number of units that Nintendo has sold for the Switch 2, but there are some other interesting things with the numbers that they put out there, with just their financial highlights, the net sales being up almost 100% year over year. And it makes sense. It should be. If it wasn't up some staggering number, I think there'd be a lot more concern. But because they're competing against a year where the Switch was on its last legs at the Switch One, having been easily past 130 million systems, and they're running out of people to sell the thing to, then here comes the Switch 2, and it's the fastest selling system of all time. Yes, net sales should be up substantially, and they are. The thing, though, is the operating profit, people notice, is like, oh, okay, well, it's up 21%. So it's not like a staggering amount or anything. Definitely not lining up with the net sales and how much that jumped. Then you look at the operating profit ratio, that's down 10 points from the previous fiscal year, and you go, oh, well, okay, yeah, so the margins aren't great for that necessarily. And net profit ratio is a bit better. It's okay, it's only down 6 points, but you kind of get what I'm saying here. Massive jump for net sales, but then you start really going down to where the costs and in some cases what like taxes and other expenses, and doesn't look as great in comparison. Especially then you look at here's the gross profit, where Nintendo did break this down and they explain it a bit more down here. The gross profit margin declined by 21.7 points to 37.4%, mainly due to significant rise in proportion of hardware sales following the launch of Nintendo Switch 2, which is a lower profit margin than Nintendo Switch, accounted for a higher proportion of those hardware sales. So basically, look, they're making a lot of money, like just gross revenue, because the Switch 2 is more expensive than the Switch 1, $450 and $500. They're taking in a lot more upfront, but the cost of the Switch 2 is it's much higher, right? The margins are slimmer. And that's something that's been brought up with the idea that Nintendo needs to just lower the price on the Switch 2. I just don't think it's feasible right now. I think it'd be very difficult for them to figure out a way where they can lower the price to $400 or less. I don't know if it's in the cards when it comes to, hey, let's not lose a bunch of money on each one of these things that we sell. So with that in mind, yes, they were asked about this, and this is over on Reuters, where the president of Nintendo, Shintaro Furukawa, was asked about the idea of the Switch 2 potentially seeing a price increase, with a lot of that being a lot of stuff being referenced with the RAM shortage and how there's an entire supply squeeze that's happening around DRAM. And of course, the Switch 2 relies on that, like most electronics that you go out and buy at this time. He says, at this point, we do not see the total profit margin situation as a major challenge. We will first work to promote hardware and then aim to improve profit margins by maximizing software sales. And that is kind of the tried and true method. Even if you break even on the hardware, the software is what drives a lot of the margin at the bottom of that balance sheet. That's where you're going to make a lot of your money if you sell a ton, especially of first party software. And we know Nintendo is very good at creating first party software that's within reason for cost and then selling tens of millions of copies. All right, like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, that thing's never going to stop selling. It's over 70 million copies right now, which is absolute insanity. Animal Crossing New Horizons, that's almost at 50 million. Probably will be with the recent update that they did for the Switch 2. So you kind of think about those numbers and go, yeah, all right, if they can just get more Switch 2 systems out there and, as Nintendo themselves saying here, popularize the system, then they shouldn't have an issue making a bunch of money on the back end, as in like years 4, 5, 6, 7, right? They say, we recognize this will not have a significant impact on our financial results this fiscal year. And I think that's very important. They go on to say, they carefully consider the possibility of raising Switch 2's price, taking into consideration the overall situation regarding platform adoption, sales trends at its feet, costs and profitability, and market environment. Okay. So it's the Switch 2. They need to get a bunch of these systems out there. They know that. It's very clear the way they're treating that with stock. They're not allowing retailers to not have Switch 2s in stock, right? They keep sending them out. And to their credit, retailers do keep buying them and setting them up, whether it's with discounts, trying to get people into the stores, it seems, or just outright selling them without too much issue right now. And Nintendo does know that, especially with everything that's happening with the DRAM and the squeeze that's going on there and the supply chain, all this stuff is just in flux. I'm sure they saw the opportunity of, let's get this going now so we can try to get to that 20 million milestone for console, and then we'll start to figure things out after that, right? And so that's why they say this fiscal year specifically, that will end March 31st. And I still think there is potential for a price increase on the Switch 2, maybe on the PS5, as crazy as it sounds, again, going through this year, just because, man, every time information comes out about what's happening behind the scenes with data centers and how much of the DRAM supply it's eating up, it just becomes a basic supply and demand equation. And you realize, hey, they probably have to bid higher for RAM and also storage. Remember, that's a big thing now as well. So SSD storage, having that go into these systems, it's just going to cost more. I don't think any of these companies right now want to lose money on their systems outright, Sony or Nintendo. So the bottom line is they would then pass it on to the end consumer. Nintendo does realize they need to get these systems out there, so they would have to find other avenues to make money, and something like NSO might just go up in price to try to even out what could end up being somewhat of a loss on the system. So no, I don't think Nintendo is looking to lower the price of the Switch 2. I kind of think currently, because they are cutting it closer with the current profit margins that they're showing in their report, they're just trying to keep things at just above water even at this time. So the stock seemed to drop quite heavily for Nintendo when these numbers got out there, and I think part of that comes down to some people just buying the rumor, selling the news, and then also some legitimate concerns that it's going to be difficult to navigate 2026 with everything going on with costs behind the scenes for the parts that are required to make the system. They also mentioned the lineup of games. I think Nintendo's going to figure that out here pretty soon. We've heard about there being a partner showcase, a general direct. They're I'm sure setting things up for some kind of big Mario game that's really being rumored right now to go along with the Mario movie that's happening here in a few months. And I think Nintendo's going to have a strong 2026 with third party and first party. So I think they're going to work all of that out. It really will just come down to, where do we go in the next 12 months with the DRAM supply? And honestly, no one really knows. So if that's the case, uncertainty is one of the worst things for investors to deal with. And a lot of times they'll play it safe and kind of take some of the money off the table. I think that's what we're seeing with Nintendo, as well as many other companies in gaming and technology right now that could be affected by all this stuff with AI data centers and DRAM. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. Do you think the Switch 1 will end up passing the PS2 when it's all said and done at that 160 million mark? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.